Welcome to the eLABorate Topics podcast, where we focus on lab-specific strategies for medical laboratory professionals. We're proud to be the healthcare detectives that work behind the scenes to get the results needed to influence medical decisions. Let's grow together and jump right into the lab.
Hi, friends, and welcome back to another episode of eLABorate Topics podcast. I'm your host for today's show, Stephanie Whitehead. For those of you tuning in for the first time, I'm your podcasting laboratory leader and co-host for the eLABorate Topics podcast. The eLABorate Topics podcast is a weekly podcast where myself and my co-hosts, Tawana Wilson and Lona Small, bring you topics related to the laboratory and leadership to help you excel inside and outside the lab. And I'm really excited for today's show, so let's get straight into it. Today I'm joined by two very special guests and friends of the show, Mr. Jim Payne and Dana Powell. Welcome, Jim, and welcome back, Dana. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for the wonderful opportunity to be on the podcast.
Yes, thank you for having us.
No problem, no problem. I'm excited for our conversation today. So for our listeners, in this episode, we're going to be talking about a very popular topic. It's one that we've discussed a couple of times on this podcast in previous episodes, and I'll put those in the show notes below if you want to go back and listen to any of those. But as a laboratory community, the national workforce shortage of experienced laboratory professionals is a very real issue. I would say even in my laboratory, we're having to do some creative things to try to work around some staffing issues that we're currently having here in San Antonio. So hopefully, as we continue as a laboratory community and as laboratory professionals and colleagues to share our experiences and share our ideas and share what we're all doing to try to combat this work shortage, solutions will be had and we'll get to a better place in the near future. So if you're listening today and you want to comment on any solutions that you found in your cities or labs, please do. It's great for us to continue to share with each other. Before we get too deep into the conversation, though, I want to introduce my guests, and I want them to tell you about some of their awesome accomplishments and journeys through their career. And so we'll start with Jim. Please introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jim Payne. I'm the phlebotomy and laboratory assistant program teacher at the Womoco Career and Technical Education Center in Spencerport, New York. Before I was teaching, I was actually working in two research laboratories at the University of Rochester, one studying the blood of Alzheimer's patients, trying to develop a blood test, and in 2014 they found some biomarkers in the blood that supposedly were going to be, in 2 to 3 years, a blood test. I never got a chance to check back up on that. So some of you may know a Alzheimer's blood test that I was in the process. I was one of the people that helped develop that. I also was on another lab where we were doing gene knockouts on the Streptococcus mutans genome, trying to find out what each gene does. And we were using high throughput techniques with the hope that this could be used on all sorts of bacteria to be able to find a novel bacteria and then individually knock out the genes and find out what they do. We were using a barcoding system for that. But very quickly I ended up realizing I wanted to be a teacher, and I actually got the opportunity to be a laboratory teacher, which allowed me to combine both my laboratory experience and teaching. And so I've, over the last 8 years, created a comprehensive and student employable laboratory science program. This program allows for students to study for a career directly out of high school in a typically medical laboratory, but also could be biotech or other opportunities. And they also could explore the career to better prepare them to enter college with experience and passion for the field that they know that they will love to work in and that they can be successful in it.
Thank you, Jim. Dana, would you like to introduce yourself to the guests?
Sure, thank you. Greetings, everyone. I am once again Dana Powell Baker. I currently work as an assistant professor at the University of Kansas Medical Center within the School of Health Professions in the Department of Clinical Laboratory Sciences. So my teaching responsibilities do include immunohematology or blood bank, as well as integrating our learners into healthcare simulation activities on our campus. I also teach in our graduate DCLS program. There I teach advanced laboratory operations and really go into a deeper dive as we discuss interprofessional practice and collaborative practice, which is very I would say, a very important focus as we talk about healthcare and the direction that we're going, recognizing the need to become more interprofessional in our practice and in our provision of, I would say, impactful patient care. But in addition to that, I always advocate that I'm a proud medical laboratory scientist. That's my role first and foremost. And in doing so as a teacher, it's an awesome opportunity to embed my experiences and my knowledge, impart that into our future generation of medical laboratory scientists. In addition to that, I am also a student, and so I'm currently pursuing my doctoral degree in curriculum and instruction, and hopefully only have a year left of that. Yay. And so I would say I wear a lot of hats. You probably see me on social media. I also am very active in our professional organizations. Just completed my last year as past chair of the Clinical Laboratory Educators Conference for the steering committee there in that capacity. And currently I serve as the chair-elect for Ascp Council of Laboratory Professionals. And so that is my background in a nutshell.
Thank you, guys. As you can tell, our guests are extremely busy in the laboratory field in their respective areas, so I'm happy for you guys to be a part of this discussion. And particularly as educators, I'm very interested to hear your perspective on the shortage of laboratory professionals in our laboratories and in our organizations nationally. So, Dana, like I said before, Dana and I have talked about this before, but recently when I connected with Jim, I thought it was also an opportunity for us to come together and discuss the issue again and keep it on everybody's forefront. In the previous discussion that we had, we discussed how laboratory science workforce shortages is affecting the laboratory professionals, and in a 2008 ASCLS source, they project a 13% increase and a nationwide need for laboratory professionals. So, Dana, I'm going to start with you. Why don't you tell myself and our listeners, what is your individual perspective on the workforce shortage in the laboratory profession, and how do you think it's going to impact or is already impacting the overall healthcare system?
Oh, sure. So we definitely have a workforce shortage due to, I think it's just so many different factors there. So if we look at it from an academic stance, although we have some very terrific, very strong programs out there, we're also starting to see closure of some of our programs while facing this need to fill these vacant positions or vacant openings. So that's definitely a concern because we don't need to see programs close or be at risk of closing when we need to add more to our pipeline going into these various roles. Also, we have to consider some of the things that have continuously been discussed, such as retirement. Retirement is definitely impacting our workforce as those who have contributed definitely a long or lengthy career to contributing towards laboratory science. They've reached their time where, it's time for them to retire, and we celebrate that. We, definitely congratulate their efforts and thank them for everything they've given to our profession, but at the same time, we also have to go back and backfill those positions. Also, not just those positions, but also the experience that leaves the laboratory with our retirees. And so that's another area that, needs to be addressed. Right now in this pandemic, we are facing, just as other healthcare professions, I would say, burnout. It's been a very stressful period, as we talk about the new normal or unprecedented time. But, laboratory professionals have been a part of that frontline effort and contributing towards, not just turnaround tests for COVID-19 testing, but for the thousands of other tests that we perform on a routine basis. So it has really exponentially impacted the workload, and it's burning out some of our workforce. And so, how do we adequately address that and that concern, especially as we talk about wellness and well-being and, maintaining your own health while also trying to be a part of this fight against this virus. And so you look at that, we look at wages, and of course, I'm not going to shy away from that. Wage equity or pay that really commiserates with the experience and the level of medical laboratory professionals. That's still something that we're combating and advocating for increased wages, increased salaries. And, right now we're looking at, I think also with our entry level, I would say, laboratory professionals really seeking a career path in the field. They want opportunities to grow and to learn and to advance, especially into leadership positions and leadership roles. And, if we're on one end looking at an increased rate of retirement and burnout, but then we also need that mentorship and guidance on the other end with our entry-level lab professionals. As I mentioned, there's just so many different factors that are impacting our workforce right now. And then, of course, that's going to directly have an impact on the optimal patient care or quality patient care that needs to be provided on, the patient front end. And so it's so many different angles and variables to this that we're looking at, and that's why these conversations or these platforms such as your podcast are really important to bring to light these issues that we're facing, but ultimately the direct impact on patient care.
You're so right, Dana. We recently, like I mentioned in the beginning, we've been trying to get creative with some of the staffing challenges we found in our own laboratory. And most recently, it triggered my mind when you said the experience leaving the laboratory, because we were going to have a couple of our cyto technicians actually retire very soon. And we know how hard it is to find experienced cyto technicians and new cyto technicians just nationally. I mean, it's one of those things where if you're a new cyto technician, you can pretty much go anywhere you want in the world because there's just so many positions open for you to apply for. And I remember that we reached out to one of our referral labs, just as a plan C or plan D if we needed to have to send out some of this stuff, like if we weren't going to have the personnel to cover this volume of testing. And the referral lab actually told us, if you start sending us your stuff, we'd have to hire an extra cyto technician also, so we're going to be in the same boat that you are. And so,
wow.
The need is definitely there, and it's definitely something that we all need to try to understand and work together to combat. So, Jim, I want to ask you also, what are your thoughts on this workforce shortage from both a local and a national perspective?
Well, like you guys were talking about, there's obviously a huge national need. I recently saw both the Medical Laboratory Observer in 2020, but also the 2021 annual salary report. Both of them are talking like 45% have a minimum of 20 years experience, and like 31% are 25 years experience. So you're talking about that, like you guys said, those numbers are real. It's not just in my local hospital or my local area that we have a feeling like there's a retirement bubble. It's across the board. Every retirement bubble is there. And then when you're talking about people feeling burned out and they feel like they don't have the ability to move up in terms of career advancement, that can be another thing that can be that they're going to end up leaving the profession. And it's a wonderful profession, and if we had more people that were able to mentor and able to take young techs and bring them up, I think that would certainly help, because only about 23% of the field, according to that Medical Laboratory Observer, are 5 years or less experience. So a significant portion are older. But one of the things, too, locally, you actually mentioned locally, I just looked up on one of our two major health systems. There's 47 jobs open for med techs, just the medical technologists alone in one of my two local hospital systems. So they just can't fill the jobs. Basically, if you have a pulse and a license, because New York State's a licensing state, they'll take you. But I think also one of the problems that we have in the medical laboratory industry is not only the retirement issue and salary and wages and that sort of thing, but also that no one knows that we exist. That you have everyone knows what a doctor does, they know what a nurse does, they know there's a person that draws blood, they probably think they're a nurse even though they're a phlebotomist. They know what a dentist does, all those sort of things. They know what they do. But once the phlebotomist draws their blood, they just know that it goes to a place called the lab, and then the doctor says that I have leukemia or I have COVID or I have nothing. I'm okay. But they don't know all of the great things that have to happen in the background. The professionals are having to work hard to make sure that the result is done quickly but also accurately, and how much that involves doing that. And I think that that's one of the problems with trying to bring in more people, because I think one of the biggest issues is that we're not able to effectively backfill. So there's more stress on the entire system. So you're talking about there's not enough young people coming in, so then there is more people that are feeling older, that there's less of them around, and then they have to do more work with less people. Where if we had lots more young people coming in, I think that would help it. So that's what I was thinking in terms of that question.
And you're so right, because in the laboratory, as soon as you lose a person, as soon as somebody says, okay, well, I'm going to move to New York because Jim said I had a post and I can move to New York. But as soon as in our laboratory, as we lose a person, because of the number of competencies we have and some of the regulatory requirements that we have for training, even if you were to out of the sky drop another tech in this person's place, we're still, 6 months, 8 months behind, because this person has to go through a lengthy training experience. They have to learn our LIS, they have to learn the organizational procedures, the departmental procedures, and so there is that lag in time between losing a person and recruiting a new employee, and that new employee being able to work individually and work as a fully competent medical laboratory technologist, that your current staff is, pulling more weight and having to be more stressed. And so I thought about that when you said, that, some of your local hospitals had over 40 positions. It's certainly significant. And we mentioned earlier that part of the shortage is due to the decrease in training programs coupled with the increase in the industry need for lab techs and phlebotomists. So, Jim, I know when you were talking about your bio, you said that you worked or you taught at a work-based learning program, and these programs can be really important because they offer early experience to high schoolers and students to the laboratory profession. They get that really early exposure and are able to understand if they love it or they hate it, and they don't waste time or money. So detail why educational programs like yours are important to our overall strategy for improving the workforce solution.
No, that's a great question. I think that one of the problems that we have is the kind of traditional way that people find out about the medical laboratory field, which, based on everyone I've ever talked to, it seems to be that they kind of fell in backwards. There's a rare few where they happen to have a counselor or a family friend or somebody that happen to say, why don't you try going in the medical laboratory field? And that's the way they got in. But most people, I was a bio major, or I was a pre-med major, and then I kind of fell into it, or I took a random test that said I should do this. One of the advantages to doing a program like mine, where students come into my program and they're going to gain basic laboratory skills, they'll learn microscopy, they'll learn staining skills, they'll learn bacterial culturing skills, they'll learn phlebotomy, they actually can get a certification in phlebotomy, where they can also get a certification as a medical laboratory assistant, and they get a chance to explore these careers, get to see if this is something they like doing. Not everyone is a laboratory person, but the students that do often find that this is exactly what they love doing. And so most of my students actually go on to careers both directly out of the program, so they can get hired as phlebotomists, lab assistants, that sort of thing, or going on to college, and now they're really well prepared. Like I said in my bio, my students have the experience and the love for the profession, so when they enter college, when you have that organic chemistry like I took when I was in college, or some course that you just struggle with, you know that you're going to keep going. You're not going to give up on this degree because you know that what you want to do. And our students actually get a chance to, not only in my lab here, which has all the same equipment that most research labs or even some clinical labs do, and a lot better than a lot of colleges, that they know they like it here, but they also get to go out into the local medical and biotech labs and get a chance to, in some cases, shadow. In some cases, we actually are doing internships and co-ops where they're working there. And so they're getting a chance to get those live sticks for phlebotomy. They're getting a chance to work as lab assistants, getting a chance to shadow higher level positions so they can get a really good real-world understanding of what's it like to work there. Because that's one of the things I can't replicate here. But when they get out there, they know that, oh, yeah, this is something I want to do, and they can test some of their skill sets to show that they know what they're doing, and that builds that confidence going into actually potentially working in the field, versus the more traditional way would have been that I read in a college catalog that they have this program. That sounds interesting. Okay, maybe I'll go for that. This allows them to experience it, test it out for free. So they're doing this as a 2-year program in their junior and senior year, and building all those skill sets, seeing if it's something they want to do, and they didn't have to pay a dime. To give you an example, I actually had a student who was 100% certain he wanted to go into microbiology, work with BSL-4, go to Emory University, the whole 9 yards. And after going through my course, he found out he didn't like icky things, and so micro was not his thing, and he ended up being an auto tech because he liked working on his car. He was doing great, he's making lots of money, but he found that out now versus when he would have been in his, sophomore, junior year in college, when he took enough micro to go, yeah, it's the micro that's the problem. So gaining that understanding of what it's like to be a workforce, I think, is really huge. And if we had more programs across the country that were doing this and getting students experience, I think would be really helpful. Now, it doesn't mean that we have to have every, county has to have one, although that would be wonderful. Even if we had more medical laboratory employees coming out, and so something like the Career Ambassadors Program is still hugely helpful. I actually had this year 30 guest speakers so far, from anywhere from my local medical labs all the way up to on Friday. I actually am about to have the chief, hold on, let me pull up his name, the chief of Global Epidemiology, Laboratory and Surveillance Branch at the CDC, Leonard Peresky, will be speaking to my students. So I'm able to get incredible guest speakers talking to my students and providing that career pathway, helping students understand, okay, I'm here now, how do I get to where you are? And so that's where I think programs like Career Ambassadors, if we had every local high school, maybe even middle school, had a career ambassador going in and talking about the medical lab, I think that would be hugely, hugely helpful.
I think that's so interesting. Congratulations on capturing somebody from the CDC to talk to your students, because that sounds like it's going to be a really great opportunity for them as high school students especially. But I agree with you. I think when me and you first talked and you mentioned, not really knowing anybody who had gone straight into the field just because that's what they wanted to do, most people kind of just fall into the medical laboratory scientist field, I actually started to think. And that's actually what happened to me. I didn't know about medical laboratory science until I went to college and, again, kind of just stumbled into the profession. And the majority of the colleagues that I know are the same way. They didn't go just seeking out to be a laboratory profession. I know very few people who did that. And so I agree with you, like having early exposure, for example, like the student you mentioned, microbiology is 100% all icky things. All the icky things that you can ever think of are in microbiology. So Dana, I want to loop you into the conversation as well as a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Clinical Laboratory Services. What value or advantage do you see for high school students that transition into the college environment that have participated in a program like Jim is mentioning, a work-based learning program where they got that early exposure, that early experience, and then went into college into an MLS program?
I think it's huge. It's very significant because as Jim was speaking, I was just thinking about, just this past year where many of us had to do a real pivot from our in-person interactions with students versus virtual or online. engagements with learners. And so not even just high school level, but I've spoken with middle school students as well. The earlier the better that we could really introduce our profession to them. And in doing so, it helps them really kind of plan and coordinate even their high school journey in preparation for entering this profession. So if I get that opportunity to interact with students, I encourage them by, hey, make sure you have a strong foundation or a solid foundation in your math and science courses. If you get to your senior year and they say, oh, you've met, your minimum requirement regarding math or science, you don't have to take a math or science course. No, you take that math and science course. Don't take your foot off the gas pedal, especially if you plan to enroll into a healthcare profession such as medical laboratory science. You need all that under your belt. If you have the opportunity to participate in a health occupations class or something biomedical, enroll in those electives that really tailor or tie into this profession. So I think it just gives them the opportunity to really align their coursework and their studies and even their volunteer work, with the profession that they ultimately want to enter. So once they come to college and they're applying for our programs, they have a better idea, just as what Jim was saying. They have a better sense of what they're getting into versus those of us who just fell into the profession. I'm one of those people as well. I wasn't familiar with the profession until I, looked at this program in a course catalog, and said, ooh, what is that? But for some students, I've noticed, for those who've been introduced early on, whether that was through middle school or high school coursework, whether it's through an in-person guest speaker or a virtual one, and they, apply to our programs, they come in with a better knowledge base of what this profession means and how we contribute to the overall healthcare team and our impact on patient care. And I just think that's just so tremendous and valuable. And just knowing that earlier on, it really just, once again, gives them that opportunity to really look at, where do I volunteer? Where do I contribute my time? What electives am I picking? Do I take a math? Do I take a science course? And it just better prepares them for this profession. And I think it makes the process a little bit more seamless for them in making that transition.
So let's talk about, go ahead.
Sorry. So that's actually talking about in terms of preparing them too. One of the things that we're able to do is offer science credit. Obviously, we're a science class, so they get some science credit with it. And we even have agreements with our local colleges so that students can either get into their programs, they have spots opened up. In one case, with one of our local colleges, our students can even get scholarship. There's a $2,500 a year scholarship for 4 years to go to their clinical lab sciences program because they realize what we're doing is highly valuable. So just it's one of those things that making sure that students are well prepared and that, like you said, they trying to take as much science and math as you can. And if you could have it where it's applied to what you're going to be going into, that's even better.
Right. That's a great way to support the pipeline.
Thank you. I was going to say, you can't really have a conversation nowadays without talking about COVID-19, and we've mentioned it a couple of times even during this conversation. So I wanted to ask you guys just how have your educational programs had to pivot or adjust or adapt with the new guidelines with COVID-19 in terms of like social distancing or clinical rotations? I'm always curious to know how COVID-19 has impacted the educational realm of things.
So for mine, we were in a hybrid model. So initially it was like 2 to 3 days a week I would have them in person, and then the next week it would flip, and then the rest of the time was remote. So that meant that the content I got through very quickly. They were great on the content. I even was able to add in extra things. We had so much time because of all the remote work, but the quality of their skills was a lot less. So that we've actually, starting in March, we're able to go to 4 days a week with 1 day, Wednesdays, not having them in person, so they're remote during that time. And so I've actually been bringing back a lot of the skills that they were weaker on and trying to catch them up on that. But overall, that was our biggest issue. The other thing that we've had is right before the pandemic hit, where we were having to shut everything down, literally the last day of school that I had students, I met with one of our local labs, University of Rochester, and they set up the idea of being able to potentially do work-based learning. So work-based learning is talking about like shadowing or co-ops, unpaid that sort of thing, or field trips, that sort of stuff. And they were open to a lot of that. And then they said, well, we'll see how COVID goes. And what it's ended up meaning that a lot of the things that we hoped would have happened by now haven't. But they are trying to have it so that they can be a location for our students to get their live sticks for phlebotomy. And they're just kind of working our way through legal as trying to make sure that everything's okay with the legal department and how COVID affects bringing outside students into the lab.
Yeah, Dana, how has COVID-19 impacted your educational program?
I'd say similar to other programs, initially when, almost a year ago now, exactly, programs had to adjust, especially for those of us that had students in clinical practicum at the time. We didn't know at that moment how it would look going forward during a pandemic. And so we had some locations that were not able to further continue clinical rotations at that moment in time. However, I would say we've been fortunate in that, we've been able to place our students. They've been able to continue on with their clinical practicums. I think it's just that initial, how do we approach this? Let's just kind of pause and halt everything for a second, reallocate our efforts, of course, towards patient care, but also, determine or figure out how can we balance the two, because we can't completely cut off clinical practicum experiences for students, because we need to, once again, keep that pipeline going. We need more laboratory professionals in these workspaces, especially now as we are fighting this pandemic. And so I think, that pause or halt, I would say, and kind of just redetermining or figuring out things allowed for us to come together collectively to figure out solutions or identify solutions to keep that practicum experience going. So thankfully we've had that. In terms of our educational delivery, we had to switch from in-person classroom lectures to delivering those virtually or remotely. But our student labs have continued. One of the things that I always tell people, I'm like, if there's going to be a profession that was prepared to face a pandemic, it's going to be medical laboratory science. We're well-versed and well-trained in disease prevention, also in our, disinfection or sanitation procedures, our protocols. We already use PPE. We're well-versed in that. And so our students were already, adapted to, donning, gloves and eye protective equipment and lab coats. And it was just a matter of ensuring that we provided adequate social distancing in the laboratory. If it was a single lab session, perhaps dividing that into two sections. So that allowed for more social distancing. If we, of course, adding the provision of masks, adding more alcohol sanitation stations or areas for that to take place, but also, maybe, I'll say implementing or integrating the use of plexiglass dividers just to ensure that spacing or division is there, not just, for the focus of continuing the work, but, student safety is our number one concern, just as patient safety is as well. So we just wanted to make sure that our students, our faculty, our staff, all felt and were safe in continuing that the laboratory work itself. And so, but thankfully, as a profession, we were geared or ramped up in terms of being able to make that pivot as successful as we can. And thankfully to this point, we're still able to contribute to the much needed pipeline for our workforce right now.
That's great. I do want to be able to talk about possible solutions, because many of the listeners of this podcast are laboratory professionals from varying ranges of job roles, so from phlebotomists to bench techs to people in management, and like yourselves, educators of different programs. And so Jim, I want to pivot back to you. We've already talked about how your program is pivotal nationally, locally, et cetera, as a strategy to combat this national workforce shortage. So I'm a clinical laboratory professional. I work in a laboratory, but, as a professional in the industry or in the field, what can I or people like me do that are working in clinical laboratories do to support programs like yours or our local high schools in your success? What can we do to help you guys?
I love this question. That's an awesome question. So one of the things I would highly suggest that people get involved with is the Career Ambassadors Program. I know Dana's going to talk probably more about that, so I'll leave most of that to her. But think about how you can help other people understand what you do. And one of the things that Career Ambassadors can do is provide you with the resources to make that easier. So it's not you having to come and talk to a local high school or local middle school or a community event or something, that they can help provide some of those resources. But getting to the point where you're making those connections. And I know that laboratory people tend to be the kind of people that want to be behind the scenes, and they want to be I'm good at my job. I'm not a very extroverted person. I'm not good at talking in front of people possibly. And so I'm nervous about doing those sort of out of the lab events. But I think that that's one of the problems we have with our staffing shortages is because we're not out in the community as much. We don't have that forward-facing industry, and so not enough people know that we exist. So I would love to see more chances of people, laboratory people, getting out into the community and letting people know what we do. And if you did one of those presentations, maybe if you have a young person who shows interest in what you talked about, maybe you try to be a resource for them. Maybe you try kind of a mentor or some similar sort of relationship where you can help them better understand where they're going to go, what it's like. If it's possible to set up shadowing or field trips, that would be hugely helpful, even at least virtual sort of field trips. If you live in a state where they have a career and technical high schools or a BOCES system like we have in New York State, try to get them to create more medical laboratory assistant and phlebotomy programs, because getting kids the chance to feel in a tactile way what it's like to be in a lab is huge, because the way that most high schools, unfortunately, science is taught, it's taught as a highly theoretical, and then the lab part is more like an advanced paperwork. You don't get a real experience to test something. So I would love to have more industry mentorship, more chances for students to potentially find a way to get into a lab, and trying to have more of these medical laboratory work-based learning programs so students can get a better idea of what's going on. Locally, I've gone from where it was very hard to get anything to happen to now it's the ball's really starting to roll. I've got our local labs are now opening up to the potential of having our students do work-based learning with them. They're coming in as guest speakers. They are helping proctor our practical portions of our assessments at the end of the year. They are on our advisory board helping us guide the program. They're even trying to help us out in the community. Another thing I would love to see, and this is something that I'm working with my local labs on, is if you believe in this concept of having everyone know about our industry, if you've got a program like mine or you've got a program, something similar, make sure from the top of the hospital all the way down to the bottom, they know that you exist and that they are actively promoting a program like mine inside of your hospital, so that all of those potential parents, all of those potential aunts, family, friends, whatever, all know that you exist. You don't want to have these programs be the best kept secret in their area, because just like the medical lab is the best kept secret in the hospital, we don't want to have the programs that help feed that be the best kept secret in your local area.
So Dana, we mentioned you because you talked about in your bio, your very active role with the ASCP, and myself, I enjoy working with you on the Council of Laboratory Professionals. So I'm going to kick it to you for you to discuss the role of the ASCP Career Ambassador in their local communities, for our lab listeners, how they can become a career ambassador, the benefits to them professionally of taking on such a role, and then how the ASCP supports lab professionals that choose to volunteer for these community efforts.
Okay, I am sitting up straight on this one. So as far as the role of ASCP career ambassadors, and it's a question I get often, especially when people may see things that I'm involved with or recognitions or opportunities that I've gained, especially over the last few years. And, the first question that I always get is, how did you even get that, or how did you even attain that? Really, my foundation is in career ambassadors. It really all started there. And funny enough, I had already been doing the work. I was visiting high schools. I was talking to different programs or doing different speaking engagements because of my passion for advocating for our profession, but also increasing visibility of our profession. And then I found out that I can actually volunteer through ASCP, and actually there's a title to that. And so why not? You're doing that same work. We're not asking for anything more. It's just you're becoming a part of this volunteer network of not just laboratory professionals, but also pathologists and resident members under this awesome umbrella where we're all doing this collective work to promote our careers, to promote our profession in various communities. And definitely reaching those communities, not just in urban areas or highly populated regions, but also really getting into those rural areas as well. So this is how we, increase visibility, but also introduce our professions to diverse populations, to diverse communities. We really want to share and promote and advocate the awesome work of medical laboratory professionals. Not only just that, but hey, if you are interested in becoming a part of this career, you've always wanted to do something in healthcare. You have a real gift in science and in math, and you just want an opportunity to contribute to society, to contribute to patient care, but didn't necessarily want to do that in becoming a nurse or a medical doctor. Here are some other routes and some other health professions that you may not have heard about or even considered. And so, life before the pandemic, we were doing hands-on activities. I know I used to always love teaching blood bank things. Especially blood typing is very popular to do in person. But also, phlebotomy is another popular demonstration or opportunity to do in person. But, we could still do very engaging presentations virtually. As Jim pointed out, he's had access to, 30 different, professionals. I'm so passionate about career ambassadors just because, once again, that's not just my foundation, but I think, we do some amazing work as both career ambassadors and pathology ambassadors. And it's really part of getting the message out and, just promoting the awesome work that we do. And so, how do you get started? Easy enough. You just go visit the ascp.org website. There's a link titled Get Involved, literally Get Involved. Click on that, and it takes you right to ambassador programs. So you can look at our ambassador programs, it's a really short application. It doesn't take long to do, and you'll be contacted by someone from ASCP because we love our volunteers. As you know, we're volunteers ourselves, and there's just so much to be gained by being a volunteer through organizations such as ASCP. You really get to see the work in action, but you also get to be a part of the change that we really want to see, not just in our profession, but in our healthcare community. And, and benefits professionally, beyond, recognition, of course, it's really just meeting other people who are just as passionate as you are. That's how you and I met Stephanie. That's how Jim and I are meeting, as well. So, we're all passionate about the work that we do and the contributions we're making. And it's just a great way to network, a great way to promote the profession. But also, if you're seeking opportunities for recognition for the awesome work you're doing. This is just another way to plug in and just to really get engaged and get active with the work that we're doing. If you're, finding yourself frustrated about something in the profession, you got to be part of the change. You got to be part of the solution. You got to jump in with the rest of us and do this amazing work.
I totally agree. I think the best way, if you have any frustrations or you have any concerns about the career field in itself, the best way is for you to be part of the people trying to solve it. And we want to hear your feedback, and we want you to let us know what we're missing so we can continue to work on improving the quality of life for all of us who choose to have a long career in the medical laboratory science field. And so, Jim, with hearing all of that, if I were to just drop you your own personal career ambassador to be dedicated to your program, tell us about the positive impact that would have on your program and, solidify the sale to anybody in New York that's listening and on the fence about being a career ambassador.
So I can say that I've had to, kind of be the snowplow in my area trying to find a way to make those connections. If I had it where somebody from Ascp was directly contacting me and was able to be my kind of mentor, helping me understand the industry better, helping me to make connections with the industry, that would be hugely helpful for the success of the program. And also, like I said, being able to make connections at all the way across the local labs so that everyone knows that my program exists, because that will help with more work-based learning, but it will also help make sure that the program is strong so that we can continue to send, at least initially, phlebotomists and lab assistants, but then that will also be eventually technicians and technologists, maybe pathologists down the road. And so the more support that we can have from local career ambassadors, the better. Even if it's something that's farther out, even if you're a pathologist from across the country. I mean, we had Dr. Dan Milner, who is the Chief Medical Officer from ASCP, speak to my students, and just his life experience as a pathologist and traveling around the world, working in Africa, was absolutely inspiring to my students. One of the things you may not realize is even the smallest little things that you think aren't that important can be absolutely inspiring to a student, can change their entire course of their life. They may end up going from thinking they're going to do radiology tech or maybe do something completely different. A student that said that he was going to drive a truck. And through just listening to a really great guest speaker and interacting with those people afterwards, changed them to now they're working in a lab. They've gone to college to be working in a lab, and you don't know how important those connections can be. And so I would say it's not just hugely helpful, but absolutely necessary. And so anyone that's on the fence, please help out your local medical lab programs, but also even if you are interested in helping me out, I'd always love the support. But the more support that you have for these at the grassroots level, the stronger your labs will be in the long run.
Thank you. I think we sold it. I don't know what else we could do to sell it. But Dana, I'm going to ask you, because sometimes as clinical lab scientists or phlebotomists, the tendency is to go through school, get your certification or your license, and you get really inundated in work. You might be working an off shift, second shift, or third shift, and you just really forget about connecting or being involved in a professional organization. And that's something, to me, for our profession that is much, much different than being a doctor or a nurse, where you're pretty much ingrained in your professional organizations. For ours, it becomes more of a choice and something we have to compel people to do. And so, as also a national issue, the support that professional organizations like the ASCP get from lab techs or vice versa can be an issue. So we want to compel our listeners who are lab techs who are not involved in ASCP or any other professional organization to immediately log on, apply to be a volunteer, get involved in your national organization. So can you speak to some of the initiatives that the ASCP is doing to increase the visibility of our profession and to reach out to laboratory professionals?
Yeah, so I think one of the amazing things is, for anyone, especially as active on social media, you'll notice that ASCP has really ramped up their social media presence, really optimizing the use of all their platforms, whether that's through LinkedIn, Twitter, or even Instagram. And it's not just for just promoting the profession itself, but also promoting the people who are doing amazing work. Whether you saw the series during Black History Month, promoting Black voices in laboratory medicine and pathology, but even now during Women's History Month, where they're highlighting our leaders and our women leaders within the organization. And I just think that is so profound and forward-moving. And that, yes, we have these different commissions and different councils, which all of us are doing this, adding to this collective body of work for not just advocating for our work, but also increasing visibility of it, especially through our participation in various programs, various schools, even our partnerships with the upcoming Knowledge Lab conference or meeting that's coming up, and our partnership with CLMA. So we really value relationship, whether it's through our members, membership, volunteers, or other professional organizations, even with ASCLS, with the recent Clinical Laboratory Educators Conference, where we were welcomed as CLP representatives to interact with educators in that environment and in that space. We realized the value and importance of, being present in those relationships and in those partnerships. So it's really helping to increase our visibility, but also helping us to collectively, hear each other, identify solutions that will help further promote the profession and the important work that we're doing. So I know that volunteering sounds like just another job, but, just a little bit of your time, you can make it as huge of a commitment or as minimum of a commitment, but either way, it's a commitment that will definitely make the difference in the work that we're trying to do. So if you're only available to give one presentation this month, or you're available to give 4, you can really make your contributions count in any degree or any amount. So I know I was one of those people. Once I went into the lab, that is where I lived for a good number of years, until I realized that I really need to become a part of these organizations such as ASCP, such as ASCLS, even AABB, and really, adding my voice to the conversation. And so, to be a part of that change, once again, that we need to see in our profession.
I totally agree. And on a previous podcast, we had a really interesting conversation with another guest where we talked about how, sometimes we pride ourselves in wearing the badge of laboratory, the hidden profession. And it's even one of the slogans sometimes on our laboratory week graphics, but then wanting the recognition that comes from actually being more outspoken and being more vocal about what we do. And so, many times laboratory professionals can be introverted people, but, this is right. One of those times where if you have, any ounce of extroverted behavior, or you just have a passion for what you do, any ounce of extrovertedness, I don't know if that's a word, extrovertedness, reach out. And if it's not for you, it's not for you, but at least you've tried. And like Jim said, even the smallest things can make an impact into a high schooler's life. And so as we wrap up the conversation, I love to ask my guests, for final pieces of advice for our listeners, something they can walk away with and something that they can grab a hold to as a task, something actionable they can do from listening to you wonderful professionals talk about this topic. So I'm going to start with Jim, maybe a final thought for our listeners today, and then also let the listeners know how they can reach out and connect to you guys after this episode. Maybe give your social media names or your email address. I'm sure we'll have some listeners who want to reach out to you and ask more questions about what you do or how they can be more involved. Did we lose Jim too?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. I was saying that in terms of we were talking about the ASCP, and they do have the Inside the Lab podcast. If you've never checked that out, I'd highly suggest that one. It's a great Med Lab podcast. Fortunately, there's not a ton of them that tend to stay around, so this one is one of them, and then Inside the Lab is one of the other ones I like to listen to. Also, from the Naked Scientist podcast, they have the Naked Genetics podcast. It's usually once a month, about 20 to 30 minutes, and they cover a topic, and it's very interesting. Sometimes it's COVID, sometimes it's something genetic-based, but it's really interesting stuff. They also have the a Star Talk podcast, another one I listen to, anything from general science to sports science to space stuff. But one thing that was along the lines you guys were talking about, kind of having a little more of a step-up mentality. I've been starting to read Tawana Wilson's book, Some Leaders Wear Lab Coats, 7 Tips to Stand Out, Get Promoted, and Get Paid By. And in her introduction, I just thought that it fit perfectly with what we've been talking about. She says, I've always thought if I did a good job, my manager would see it and the rest would magically fall into place. I would then be recognized and rewarded. I thought doing a good job and being a hard worker was enough. The truth is that the mindset is far from reality. I learned that I must first be an advocate for myself before anyone else would be willing to be a champion for me. The best way to advocate for yourself is being aware of your abilities, recognize your skills, and develop habits to set you apart from the rest. And I think that is spot on. I've been actively doing that, especially recently. I've been getting actively involved more on LinkedIn. It's actually how I met Stephanie and everyone at the eLABorate Topics podcast, but also trying to make connections across LinkedIn. And I think for our laboratory professionals that we're listening to, that sort of mentality of taking it to the next level, stepping up, getting outside of your comfort zone, making yourself more valuable, not just I did a good job today, that's it. I'm just doing my job, but stepping up outside of that. I think if they took that to heart, what she said in that introduction of her great book, I think that is what we're looking for in terms of helping keep the industry going strong. You asked in terms of how to reach me. I'm on LinkedIn. You can just look for James Payne 4 is the end of the LinkedIn page. I can also be reached at jpayne at Monroe, 2, BOCES, so that's BOCES.org. Also, you can check out my course at www.monroe2boces.org/WMOCO. That's WEMOCO.ASPX.
Thank you, Jim, and shout out to our co-host Tawana Wilson on her awesome book. So, Dana.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So, okay, great. Thank you. So my advice, of course, get involved. I cannot, reiterate that enough. And whether that's through ASCP, ASCLS, I know we have members who are engaged with AABB or ASH, ASM. Just find an opportunity to plug in and contribute in the way that's not just meaningful for you, but also meaningful in a way that you're contributing to the profession and also to our communities. I can't advocate for that enough. Also for our educators who are seeking resources, especially for career ambassadors, you can visit this website called whatsmynext.org. So whatsmynext.org. It's a great website. It highlights the different professions within laboratory medicine, but there's also a link there for educator resources where you can actually connect with a career ambassador in your area. And if you're not able to link up with a career ambassador that way, you can directly contact ASCP, and they'll definitely get us connected with you all, because that's our role. We want to connect with local programs, local schools within our communities, that way to continue that promotion of our profession, but also to increase visibility of it too. Also, other resources that you may want to look into, Jim shared some amazing ones. I would also add the Off the Bench podcast is another great resource, as well as the People of Pathology podcast. So I definitely want to shout out that one too as well. And as far as where to find me, so I can be found on LinkedIn as Dana Powell Baker. I can also be found on Twitter. My handle there is @thatlabchick. And